August 1945. Sasebo, Japan's giant I-400 submarines sit intact, their hangars sealed and catapults quiet. Built to launch 3 Seiran bombers toward Panama in minutes, they surrendered before a single combat takeoff. In late August 1945, within days of Japan's surrender, U.S. Navy boarding parties entered Sasebo Naval Base and inspected 2 unprecedented submarines, I-400 and I-401. Each displaced roughly 6,560 tons, submerged and stretched about 122 meters in length, larger than many pre-war destroyers. A cylindrical, pressure-tight hangar ran along the deck centerline, capable of housing 3 purpose-built Aichi M6A1 Seiran floatplane bombers with their wings and tail folded. A forward-mounted compressed-air catapult, roughly 26 meters long, gave these aircraft a short, straight shot into wind at sea. The inspection teams noted the intention behind the design: a covert aviation platform able to travel interoceanic distances and launch a multi-aircraft strike far from any Japanese airbase. The I-400 design traded conventional torpedo armament and submerged agility for reach and aviation capacity. Reported surface range reached a claimed to 37,500 nautical miles, at about 14 knots, enough to circle the globe at lower speeds without refueling under ideal planning. Maximum surfaced speed approached 18.7 knots. Submerged speed was far lower, typical of the era's battery limits. The aviation fit dictated unusual topside geometry, a 3.54 0-meter diameter hangar, a forward offset of the conning tower to clear the catapult track, and rails for aircraft dollies leading from hangar to launcher. Deck handling was a choreography of covers, cranes, and locking pins. Under calm conditions and with pre-staged aircraft, crews trained to spot, unfold, fuel, arm, and launch 3 Seirans in approximately 12-15 minutes a deck cycle, workable on paper but brittle if sea state rose beyond gentle swells. Post-war American technical officers left concise judgments. One Naval Technical Mission to Japan report described the I-400 concept as a remarkable engineering solution to a strategic aspiration. U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan, 1945 paraphrase, while noting the maintenance burden imposed by an aviation-capable submarine hull. The Seiran, powered by the 2,200 HP Aichi M6A1 engine, could carry an 800 kilograms bomb and, in trials, had the option to fly without floats to gain speed and range for a one-way mission profile. On paper, that combination suggested an ability to attack infrastructure targets like the Gatun locks of the Panama Canal. In practice, by 1945, Japan's bunker oil stocks, aircrew training time, and operational security were all deteriorating faster than new concepts could be fielded. Japanese planners understood both the promise and the constraints. Commander Minoru Genda, a key IJN planner, later reflected that special mission platforms revealed ingenuity outrunning capacity. Paraphrase, 1944-45 recollection. A formulation consistent with the resource collapse of late-war Japan. The submarine's own crews faced a steep learning curve. Not only torpedo and navigation drills, but also deck aviation handling in open water, night fueling with minimal spillage risk, and rapid catapult procedures under time pressure. Each step multiplied variables: wind over deck, ship heading, swell period, and the delicate tolerances of folding airframes exposed to salt spray. American submariners offered their own skeptical lens. Richard H. O'Kane, celebrated for aggressive attack doctrine in Tang and Wahoo, remarked post-war that a submarine's best weapon is invisibility, and that any mission which compelled a sub to linger surfaced for minutes invites counter-detection. Paraphrase, post-war interview. The I-400 seconds launch sequence, however, streamlined, forced precisely that exposure. extended topside work, engine noise for catapult air, and predictable headings to generate apparent wind. Even with radar detectors and lookouts, the deck cycle baked in tactical risk that conventional fleet boats could often avoid. Still, the scale and engineering of I-400 and I-401 impressed inspectors. The hangar's longitudinal placement preserved hull strength. Twin diesel plants and vast fuel tanks explained the extraordinary stated radius, and the integration of aircraft handling gear into the hull form anticipated later ideas about multi-domain reach from covert platforms. The submarines mounted standard torpedo tubes and deck guns, but their true purpose was singular: deliver 3 strike aircraft, swiftly, at strategic range. In an era when a single cut to a canal lock or a power plant transformer yard could ripple across oceanic logistics, the concept aimed at asymmetric effects rather than attritional tonnage sinking. Yet the docks at Sasebo told the counter-story. Paint scuffed by hurried fitting out, spares inventories thinned by blockade, and crew rosters interrupted by late-war reassignments all pointed to an operational reality misaligned with the design brief. Even the claimed range was irrelevant without reliable fuel allotments to exploit it. The U.S. says, teams inventoried the Seirans and found them intact, but grounded by surrender. The catapult gear was serviceable, but its combat debut would never occur. The boat's fate captured, studied, and ultimately scuttled underscored the broader collapse of the Japanese war economy by mid-1945. Remarkable engineering could not substitute for an eroding logistics base, and invisibility could not be reconciled with a 15-minute deck evolution in swell and threat. What survived in Sasebo was not a failed idea so much as a late idea. As one American report understated, employment came too late to be evaluated in combat. U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan, 1945. The I-400 seconds embodied an intent to strike far and be gone. The war, by 1945, no longer offered them the time, fuel, or secrecy to try. The Sasebo inspections revealed a platform optimized for a brief surfaced launch window at strategic range, but constrained by fuel, training tempo, and exposure during deck operations. The concept's engineering maturity could not overcome the late-war collapse of the logistical and operational conditions it required. Late 1944 Inland Sea. The Imperial Japanese Navy organized repetitive deck-handling drills for the I-400 program inside the relatively sheltered waters between Kure and Saeki. The goal was specific and quantifiable. Move 3 Aichi M6A1 Seiran floatplane bombers from a pressure-tight hangar, unfold their wings and tail, fuel and arm them with up to 800 kilograms each, and launch all 3 by catapult within 12-15 minutes. Stopwatch discipline dominated these evolutions. Crews rehearsed the sequence until each man step removing locking pins, engaging the dolly rails, locking the folding mechanism, topping fuel could be timed to the second. Training logs, as summarized in the 1945 U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan, described the critical path as hangar door open to third aircraft off the rail, with a target around 14 minutes in calm water. USNTMJ, 1945. Paraphrase. Metrics from those trials revealed both promise and brittleness. In flat conditions, see State 1, the first aircraft could roll from the hangar and be off the catapult in roughly 4 or 5 minutes. The second followed in another 4 minutes. The third typically needed 5 minutes more, with cumulative handling time rising as the deck crowded and the apparent wind shifted with ship heading, even in the inland sea, where swell heights were often under 0. 5 meters, cross-chop and ferry wakes disrupted the spotting teams, forcing pauses to secure floats or recheck wing locks. In external waters, where sea state 3-4 could bring 1-2 meter waves and deck pitch angles exceeding 3-4 degrees, officers anticipated abort criteria well before the 12-15 minute mark. As one IJN planner later reflected, the launch window existed only when sea and wind consented. Minoru Genda, 1944-45, paraphrase. The airframe's own parameters shaped the drill. With the 2,200 HP Aichi Atsuta, the Seiran could reportedly reach to 475 kilometers per hour, is approximately equal to 255 knots. Without floats and tilde, 440 kilometers per hour is approximately equal to 238 knots. With them, figures vary by configuration. Uncertain, exact operational average. Combat range has been cited around 650 nautical miles depending on tankage and whether floats were carried. Uncertain, mission-specific loadout. The I-400 design anticipated a one-way, no-float strike profile for the Panama mission to maximize speed and radius. The crews still trained float procedures for recovery options during workups. A naval technical mission summary captured the trade succinctly. Folding mechanisms and float options increased handling complexity and failure points in salt conditions. USNTMJ 1945, paraphrase. In time drills, even a single bulky hinge could add 30-60 seconds. Multiplied across 3 aircraft, schedule margins vanished quickly. Fuel and training time constrained progress as sharply as sea state. By late 1944, heavy fuel bunker allocations to the combined fleet were shrinking quarter on quarter, and aviation gasoline stocks inside the home islands required rationing for priority units. Submarine sorties for the I-400 group therefore competed directly with convoy defense and standard fleet boat patrols. A staff note summarized the opportunity cost. A 10,000, 12,000 nautical mile workup cruise at tilde, 14 knots, would consume fuel equivalent to multiple patrols by a smaller Type B-1 fleet submarine boats, which still tallied sinkings measured in tens of thousands of tons when properly employed. Ingenuity outrunning capacity, Genda observed, paraphrase, was not a critique of the concept so much as a recognition that the logistics graph was collapsing under blockade. Training also brought communications security risks that were hard to erase. Deck drills were scheduled to minimize radio traffic, with local signals passed by flag and lamp where possible, and lookouts scanning for Allied photo recon. Yet every rehearsal demanded at least 10-20 minutes of guaranteed surface time. Radar war lessons from 1,943-44 American air search radars at hundreds of megahertz, shipborne sets on pickets, and growing HF divided by DF reach made that window increasingly perilous even near Japan's shores. Richard Hay. O'Kane's post-war observation that a submarine invites counter-detection whenever forced to linger surfaced, paraphrase, was borne out in aggregate data. Allied anti-submarine aircraft sortie counts in the Northwest Pacific rose markedly in 1944-45, and radar contacts often preceded visual sightings by miles. To mitigate, crews refined deception measures. Launch courses were run along shorelines to blend a narrow radar cross-section with clutter. Catapult tests were prefaced by short, staged dashes to reset apparent wind without telegraphing a constant heading, and some rehearsals used dummy loads to reduce fueling time. Even so, the time and motion arithmetic remained unforgiving. 3 aircraft demanded 3 loadouts, 3 final checks, and a deck team spread thin over tilde. 25 meters of catapult track and rail gear. If the first Seiran misfired, or a catapult seal leaked, the entire evolution stalled. Technical officers documented spare seals, clamps, and valves in the forward stores. By early 1945, replenishment intervals stretched, and cannibalization of training gear became common practice. USNTMJ 1945, paraphrase. The 631st Naval Air Group formed to operate Seirans absorbed these constraints in its syllabus, emphasizing low-altitude navigation, night approaches, and instrument competency for pilots expected to fly long over-water legs, possibly without floats. Pilot throughput, however, lagged. With only a few dozen airframes completed and engine reliability sensitive to maintenance hours that were harder to fund with dwindling spares, the group's workups emphasized a small, mission-ready cadre rather than broad redundancy. That choice optimized for a single, decisive sortie and left little tolerance for attrition during rehearsal or deployment. As the drills continued, the inland sea behaved like a laboratory and a warning at once. The clock proved the concept within narrow bands, calm seas, short evolutions, full complements of trained hands, and adequate fuel. The same clock, confronted by chop, supply delays, or a single faulty fitting, exposed how quickly the launch window could close. The I-400 seconds had the length, volume, and machinery to reach distant targets. The Seirans had the speed and bomb load to hurt them. But the launch choreography, 3 aircraft in a quarter of an hour, remained the hinge on which the entire strategic effect would turn. Timed inland sea trials demonstrated that 3-ship launch cycles were feasible only in calm water with full maintenance and fuel support. Once friction, sea state, spares, or detection risk entered the system, the deck cycle advantage eroded faster than crews could compensate. Early 1945, Tokyo and Kure, the I-400 program's planning cells worked through the mechanics of a strike on the Panama Canal's Atlantic side locks, focusing on the Gatun complex. The premise was straightforward. The submarines would cross the Central Pacific in extended radio silence, approach to within a launch radius set by Aichi M6A1 Seiran performance, and catapult 3 aircraft per boat in a rapid deck cycle timed to darkness and weather. Staff estimates set the decisive variables. Aircraft radius, with an 800 kilograms bomb, is approximately equal to 650 nautical miles under select configurations, uncertain. Sea state limits for a 12-15-minute launch, and the fuel curve for a to 16-18 knot transit across 7,000, 9,000 nautical miles of ocean, depending on route. Japan's designers had given I-400 class boats a claimed to 37,500 nmi endurance at to 14 knots. Staff officers increasingly read that figure as theoretical, without guaranteed bunker oil allotments. The geography of the target imposed additional structure. The Gatun locks lie roughly 45 kilometers inland from the Caribbean coast. A Seiran, attacking from the seaward side, would need to overfly the isthmus's layered defenses and strike lock gates or transformer yards that fed the lock machinery. Timetables sketched in Kure assumed a pre-dawn or moonless night arrival, with aircraft flying low at to 200-300 feet to minimize radar exposure before a short pop-up to aim. Without floats, an option favored for speed and radius, the aircraft would be committed to a one-way profile, with recovery limited to a night ditching and possible submarine pickup. Uncertain. Exact rescue plan. A naval technical mission summary later framed the trade with bureaucratic dryness. The absence of floats simplifies launch handling but forecloses routine recovery. USNTMJ 1945. Paraphrase. Route modeling wrestled with detection risk more than distance. The shortest tracks brought the boats near Allied picket lines and maritime patrol arcs built around Pearl Harbor, the Marshalls, and later the Marianas. By 1945, American long-range patrol aircraft and escort carriers pushed radar coverage hundreds of miles from major bases. Japanese planners consequently considered quiet lanes, hugging weather features, where squall lines could mask periscope wakes, and brief surface runs for battery charge. Even so, a transit of to 8,000 nautical miles at an average of 12-14 knots implied on the order of 24-28 days underway, with dozens of nightly charges and multiple logistics unknowns. Every surfaced hour risked radar detection. Every extra day increased the chance of a random contact report propagating through Allied nets. Communications, security, and deception got their own annexes. Orders envisioned minimal HF transmissions compressed, one-time pad encoded, and sent at prearranged windows, if at all. Navigational fixes were to rely on celestial shots, dead reckoning, and limited passive radio bearings. To reduce distinctive signatures, the boat's unusual hangar silhouette encouraged nighttime surfacing and daylight submergence in open water. Planners also studied moon phases. A narrow band of dates offered maximum darkness during the predicted attack hour, reducing visual detection probability by patrol aircraft, whose searchlights and radar could otherwise cue interceptions miles out. Weather, phase, and fuel must make common cause. A staff officer summarized Combined Fleet Planning Note 1945, paraphrase. Constraint charts told a harsher story. Fuel remained the binding resource. Quarter-by-quarter allocations to the combined fleet had fallen sharply since mid-1944. A single I-400 round trip at speed threatened to consume fuel equivalent to multiple patrols by smaller fleet submarines. The opportunity cost was explicit in staff arithmetic. For the same bunker oil, Type B-class boats might sink tens of thousands of tons of shipping effects that could be counted, whereas the Panama strike's payoff, while potentially strategic, remained probabilistic. Ingenuity outrunning capacity, Minoru Genda observed of several late-war special operations, paraphrase 1944-45, and the I-400 plan fit the pattern. Intelligence pressure compounded logistics. By early 1945, Allied code-breaking, Ultra divided by FRUPAC, was routinely extracting value from portions of Japanese naval traffic, even when messages remained unreadable. Traffic analysis and DF bearings mapped movement patterns. The mere existence of very large Japanese submarines had been inferred from sightings and wreckage reports since 1944, and Allied operations widened the net around suspected transit corridors. Japanese countermeasures, relay runners, low-power bursts, and route deconfliction reduced, but could not eliminate the probability that a long, multi-boat approach would trigger suspicion. A naval technical mission assessment after the surrender concluded that sustained radio silence and weather exploitation would have been necessary but not sufficient conditions for success. USNTMJ 1945, paraphrase. Technical details fed into the launch problem again. The deck cycle's 12-15-minute target assumed sea state is less than or equal to 1, 2, and a steady apparent wind across the catapult. Tropical waters near the Caribbean offered high humidity, sudden squalls, and cross seas that could push pitch and roll beyond safe limits for aircraft unfolding and arming. A single jammed hinge or a leak in the catapult air system could add 120 seconds, erasing darkness margins. Staff checklists therefore mandated redundant seals, hand tools staged at specific stations, and a launch abort threshold tied to deck motion. But redundancy weighed against stealth. More gear topside meant more time exposed and more noise under conditions where even a few minutes mattered. Even if the Seirans reached Gatun, effects analysis reminded commanders that gates, culverts, and transformers were robust. An 800 kilograms GP bomb could damage or disable gate leaves and machinery houses, but planners recognized uncertainty about repair times. A canal is a system. Resilience must be assumed. One engineer cautioned in a briefing synopsis, Kure 1945, paraphrase. The potential upside, a weeks-long disruption of inter-ocean U.S. logistics was balanced against the likelihood of rapid emergency repairs by U.S. Army engineers. By spring 1945, the spreadsheet logic tightened. Long transit, shrinking fuel, rising Allied surveillance, brittle launch conditions, and ambiguous damage timelines. The I-400 seconds still embodied reach that few navies could match. The Seiran still offered speed and a heavy warload. But the Panama concept depended on a chain of narrow tolerances holding end-to-end under the very conditions blockade, attrition, and intelligence pressure that made tolerance scarce. Feasibility modeling showed that the Panama strike hinged on a string of best-case assumptions: fuel, weather, darkness, and undetected approach, while the late-war operating picture pushed each parameter in the opposite direction, eroding the plan's odds before a single sortie launched. May-August 1945, Western Pacific. By mid-1945, the I-400 program's strategic aim pivoted under the combined weight of fuel scarcity, training slippage, and Allied intelligence pressure. The Panama scenario, already a chain of tight tolerances, gave way to a nearer target with clearer military payoff: the U.S. fleet anchorage at Ulithi Atoll, roughly 1,300 nautical miles east of the Philippines. Staff logic was blunt. A strike that disabled even one fast carrier, oiler group, or repair asset inside Ulithi could impose immediate operational friction on U.S. Pacific Fleet tempo. The revised plan compressed transit distance, substituted a well-mapped naval target set for canal infrastructure, and sought to exploit surprise with pre-dawn, low-level attacks by 3 Seirans from each I-400 class boat. The retask synchronized with reconnaissance preparations. Type AM aircraft carrying submarines I-13 and I-14, smaller than the I-400 class, but aviation-capable, were tasked to ferry disassembled Nakajima C-6N Seiun MIRT reconnaissance aircraft. Forward, 2 airframes per boat, uncertain, exact stowage detail. Intended to stage via truck and scout Ulithi before the strike. The timeline was compressed: delivery and assembly at forward airstrips, reconnaissance flights to plot ship dispositions and anchorage layouts, then a narrow launch window for the I-400 and I-401 Seirans to deliver 800 kilograms bomb loads against high-value hulls. Charts showed Ulithi's lagoon, roughly 22 miles, is approximately equal to 19 nautical miles, across, with berths dispersed among islets. Pilots were briefed to home on silhouettes and wakes, then exit on a one-way profile without floats. Allied code-breaking heightened the hazard. Through spring and summer 1945, traffic analysis and decryption, ultra divided by FRUPAC, repeatedly cued Allied forces to Japanese submarine movements. I-13 departed Japan in July and was lost on 16-17 July 1945 to hunter-killer forces aircraft from the escort carrier USS Anzio, CVE-57, and the destroyer escort USS Lawrence C. Taylor are credited in U.S. accounts after contact chains that included radar and HF divided by DF bearings. Historiography: precise contribution of ultra versus local detection varies by source. Whether or not a single decrypt sealed I-13's fate, the operational signal was unmistakable. Long transits by aircraft carrying subs were now threaded through dense Allied search patterns. The loss reduced reconnaissance mass by 50% for the Ulithi plan and forced planners to fall back on a single ferry, I-14, for C6N delivery and on dated anchorage intelligence. Fuel arithmetic continued to dominate staff tables. A round trip from the inland sea to the Ulithi release point is approximately equal to 3,500–4,500 nautical miles, depending on routing and speed. Discipline still required: thousands of tons of fuel oil across the I-400 group and, its escorts or tenders, uncertain, any dedicated tanker support. The I-400 class tanks were designed for oceanic reach, but allocations by mid-1945 had tightened to the point that commanders weighed each refueling against convoy escort and home defense needs. Ingenuity outrunning capacity, Minoru Genda later said of such late war projects, paraphrase 1944-45, and the Ulithi retask did not escape that verdict. The mission's feasibility remained contingent on fuel allotments that could be rescinded by a single air raid's damage report. Tactics evolved alongside deception plans. Briefing notes instructed Seiran crews to overpaint national markings before launch, and in some drafts, to apply U.S. EZNA identification schemes to briefly complicate visual IFF at dawn. Historiography. Accounts differ on exact markings applied versus proposed. The aircraft would launch clean, no floats to maximize speed, is approximately equal to 475 kilometers per hour, dependent on configuration, uncertain, and radius. Carry a single 800 kilograms GP bomb each and attack from low altitude to avoid radar cueing by destroyer or picket sets. Submarines would sprint to generate apparent wind for the catapult, then submerge as the third aircraft cleared the rail. Recovery was not planned. Pilots were briefed on ditch points should pickup windows arise, but the operational assumption was a one-way sortie. Training delays bit hard in the final weeks. The 631st Naval Air Group had to maintain engine reliability on the 200 HP Aichi Atsuta under salt and heat, keep folding mechanisms within tolerances, and rehearse night navigation over featureless water. Logs, summarized by American technical officers after the surrender, describe cannibalization of parts and stretched maintenance intervals by mid-1945. U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan, 1945, paraphrase. Each delay pushed the strike closer to a narrowing set of moonless dates and monsoon weather transitions. Meanwhile, Allied anti-submarine sortie counts rose. B-24 and PB-4Y patrols extended radar coverage and dropped sonobuoys along likely approaches. Sustained radio silence would have been necessary but not sufficient. One U.S. Priant post-war assessment concluded, USNTMJ 1945, paraphrase, capturing the paradox, stealthy doctrine trapped inside an increasingly surveilled ocean. By early August, the strike order sequence approached execution. I-400 and I-401 were at sea with Seirans aboard. Route legs were plotted to position them for a mid-August attack. Then events outran planning. Atomic strikes on Hiroshima, 6 August, and Nagasaki, 9 August. Soviet entry into the war, 9 August. And imperial directives that culminated in Japan's acceptance of surrender terms on 15 August 1945. The submarines received conflicting signals in the transition window, first to proceed, then to hold, and finally to surrender. Crews destroyed sensitive documents. Aircraft were sometimes disassembled or jettisoned overboard to prevent capture. Historiography. Specific disposal actions vary by boat. The I-400 seconds never launched in anger. American submariners' post-war verdict echoed the logic that had shadowed the plan since inception. A submarine's best weapon is invisibility. Richard H. O'Kane said, paraphrase, post-war interview. And the Ulithi concept, like the Panama scheme, demanded a long-surfaced window and a predictable heading for apparent wind. The retask tightened the target set and cut transit distance, but it could not change the two binding constraints that ruled late 1945, fuel and time. The 1945 pivot from Panama to Ulithi shortened distance and clarified targets, but left the core vulnerabilities, fuel allocation, detection risk during the deck cycle, and schedule fragility unchanged. Surrender intervened before those risks could be tested in combat. 1944-45 Home Islands. The I-400 program unfolded against a fuel ledger that no plan could escape. Japan's liquid fuel ecosystem synthetic output, domestic reserves, and the tanker pipeline from Southeast Asia contracted quarter by quarter through 1944-45. Staff tables that once justified acclaimed to 37,000 500 nautical mile endurance at 14 knots for I-400 class hulls increasingly had to footnote the obvious: radius without bunkers is theory. Workup cruises for the carrier submarines at 12-16 knots on the surface for battery charge cycles absorbed fuel measured in hundreds of tons per leg, uncertain, exact per boat consumption, and every hour burned in training was an hour not available to convoy escorts, mine layers, or fleet submarines still tasked to interdict Allied shipping. Training tempo turned into arithmetic. The 631st Naval Air Group and the submarine crews needed repetition in 3 domains. 1. Deck handling to hit the 12-15-minute 3 aircraft launch cycle. 2. Seiran pilot proficiency for overwater navigation and low-level ingress with an 800 kilograms bomb load. And 3. Night procedures under minimal lighting that would not silhouette the boat during catapult operations. Each full-up evolution demanded 10-20 minutes of guaranteed surface time, days or nights of battery charge windows, and aviation gasoline allocations for taxi tests and short hops. As spares tightened in late 1944, engine hour tracking grew conservative, maintenance intervals stretched, and cannibalization across limited airframes crept into the schedule. U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan, 1945, paraphrase. The result was a syllabus skewed toward a small mission-qualified cadre rather than a depth chart optimal for a single throw, brittle for anything sustained. Fuel scarcity imposed subtle second-order effects beyond raw distance. To conserve bunkers, boats ran more legs at economical speeds nearer 12-14 knots, lengthening transit times by days across oceanic arcs of 3,500, 9,000 nautical miles. Longer transits multiplied surface charge cycles and therefore detection windows. With Allied air search radars and HF divided by DF coverage expanding in 1945, the exposure curve steepened as speed slackened. Weather, phase, and fuel must make common cause. A combined fleet note advised, paraphrase, 1945. The fuel variable, unlike the moon, could not be scheduled into alignment. Communications discipline attempted to buy back risk. Prearranged radio silence windows, one-time pad brevity messages, and reliance on celestial fixes reduced the chance that a long-haul route would light up Allied intercept nets. Yet every training block required local coordination tug movements, range-clear signals, and safety checks that induced some signal traffic near Kure and Saiki. The paradox was structural. The safer the boats tried to be at sea, the more they needed to perfect topside evolutions at home, and those rehearsals burned both fuel and secrecy margins. Richard H. O'Kane's post-war critique that any mission forcing a sub to linger surfaced for minutes invites counter-detection, paraphrase, was not just a tactical maxim. Under late war conditions, it had become a campaign-level constraint. Opportunity cost sharpened the internal debate. A Type B-1 fleet submarine on a standard patrol might still find targets on approaches to the home islands and the South China Sea. Tonnage sunk could be tallied. By contrast, the I-400 concept converted scarce fuel and training hours into a low-probability, high-payoff strike whose effect disrupting the Panama Canal or crippling a carrier at Ulithi could be strategic but uncertain in duration. Staff memoranda began to juxtapose metrics. 1 round trip for the I-400 group versus multiple routine patrols. 3 800 kilograms bombs against a complex system of gates, locks, and transformers whose repair timelines were unknown. A 12-15-minute deck evolution on a calm sea against the persistence of convoy attrition. Minoru Genda's line about ingenuity outrunning capacity, paraphrase 1944-45, moved from aphorism to budget note. Logistics also gated deception. Drafts of the Ulithi Plan proposed overpainting Hinomaru, possibly applying U.S. Markings and launching clean to gain is approximately equal to 30-35 knots of cruise speed without floats. Uncertain, configuration specific. Each such choice traded one resource for another: paint and time, speed and recovery, simplicity and post-strike options. Without floats, the Seiran radius improved figures around 600-650 nautical miles appear in planning in exchange for a one-way profile that demanded either deliberate ditching or rendezvous at preset pickup points. That in turn required the submarines to loiter where their best weapon, invisibility, in O'Kane's phrase, was least available. Even the engineering triumphs carried maintenance tales. The forward 26-meter catapult and the pressure-tight hangar demanded seals, clamps, and valves that suffered from salt, grit, and temperature cycles. Technical notes captured by U.S. teams after the surrender mention recurring checks on hinge clearances and pneumatic integrity. A single leak could add 120 seconds to the launch path. U.S. NTMJ 1945, paraphrase. Multiply by 3 aircraft and a dark, choppy sea, and the schedule that worked in the inland sea collapsed at the edge of the mission's envelope. The system's elegance, the ability to put 3 800-kilogram bombs into the air from a platform that could cross oceans, was thus inseparable from its fragility. By mid-1945, the ledger closed itself. Bunker allocations contracted again, uncertain, precise tonnage per quarter. Allied patrol density thickened, and the strategic picture flipped from ambition to preservation. The I-400 group still held what few Japanese units did: interoceanic reach and an organic air punch. But the price of each trial launch in fuel, secrecy, and time rose faster than the odds of operational success. The program never answered the counterfactual: what would have happened had 3 Seirans reached Gatun or a dawn silhouette at Ulithi, because the war's resources could no longer stake the bet. Late war Japan could fund either repetition or reach, but not both. Fuel scarcity throttled training, training scarcity magnified deck, cycle risk, and the resulting fragility made the I-400 strategic promise an ever more expensive gamble. August-September 1945, Western Pacific. On 15 August 1945, radio monitors aboard I-400 and I-401 copied the Imperial Rescript announcing acceptance of Allied terms. The boats were already on legs intended to position them for a mid-August strike with 3 Aichi M6A1 Seirans per hull, an 800 kilograms bomb per aircraft, and a deck cycle goal of 12-15 minutes. The operational geometry that had consumed months' fuel curves at 12 to 14 knots. Launch headings for apparent wind. Sea state limits at is less than or equal to 1-2 collapsed into a new problem set. Document destruction, aircraft disposition, and navigation to a surrender rendezvous without triggering combat incidents. Within hours, follow-on orders directed all submarines to cease offensive operations, surface by daylight with black flags or prescribed signals, and proceed to designated points under radio control, historiography. Exact signal phrasing varied by circuit and relay ship. On board, commanders executed denial procedures practiced in outline but rarely in full. Crews destroyed codebooks, one-time pads, recognition charts, and radio keys. Demolition charges, if set for sensitive lockers, were disarmed in favor of preserving hulls for surrender. The Seiran's 3 per I-400 class boat, each with folding wings and tail, presented a special case. Some Japanese accounts and U.S. post-war interviews concur that airframes were disassembled and pushed overboard to prevent capture. Others indicate partial disassembly with critical components, propellers, gun sights, radio sets dumped separately, uncertain, exact sequence per boat. A U.S. Naval Technical Mission synopsis later noted simply that the aircraft were not delivered intact for flight test, while hangar and catapult systems remained serviceable enough for inspection, USNTMJ 1945. Paraphrase. The choice preserved the submarine's structures for boarding, while denying the Allies a fully assembled strike package. The navigational problem shifted from evasion to compliance. Under armistice instructions, Japanese submarines were to surface by day, show prescribed signals, and broadcast position reports at intervals. For crews trained to treat surfaced minutes as lethal exposure, this imposed unfamiliar risk management. Stay visible enough to avoid air attack by mistake, yet hold radio discipline in congested ether. The I-400 hulls to 122 meters long, with a distinctive to 3.54 0-meter diameter hangar along the center line, were hard to mistake even at range. American hunter-killer groups, calibrated for contact, now had to escort rather than engage. Employment came too late to be evaluated in combat. A U.S. technical summary would later remark, USNTMJ 1945, and at sea, in August 1945, that sentence felt literal. A platform built around a 15-minute deck window, spent days in deliberate, unhurried surface transits towards surrender. Distances and timings retained their discipline, only repurposed. Rendezvous points lay hundreds to more than 1,000 nautical miles from the boat's positions on 15 August, at economical speeds near 14 knots. That meant several days of daylight steaming interleaved with battery charges. Black flag signals or white flags. Historiography, signal practice varied by unit, reduced but did not eliminate the risk of misidentification by Allied aircraft. Crews posted lookouts specifically for inbound patrol planes to cue pyrotechnic signals. Sustained radio silence would have been necessary, but not sufficient, for the pre-surrender missions. American assessors had written USNTMJ 1945. Paraphrase. Now, measured, unequivocal transmissions were the safer course. Boarding chronology unfolded quickly once contact was made. U.S. destroyers and submarines intercepted, ordered course and speed by signal lamp and radio, and placed prize crews aboard. The boarding parties recorded tonnage to 6,560 tons submerged displacement, hangar dimensions, catapult length to 26 meters, and the presence of dollies and rails for aircraft spotting. Diesel spaces showed the wear of long workups under rationed spares. Torpedo rooms carried standard loads, but the aviation mission dominated topside arrangement. A remarkable engineering solution to a strategic aspiration, one U.S. Naval Technical Mission Report phrased it, paraphrase, 1945. A judgment that survived the anticlimax of capture. For Japanese officers, the final log entries traced a professional arc from intention to acceptance. Minoru Genda's late war reflection. Ingenuity outrunning capacity. Paraphrase. 1944-45. Fit the surrender deck, as well as any planning room. The I-400 seconds still possessed theoretical radius on the order of tens of thousands of nautical miles at 14 knots, still could in calm sea launch 3 aircraft in a quarter hour, still carried the conceptual power to threaten infrastructure with 3 800 kilograms bombs. But the binding constraints had prevailed first: fuel allocations that throttled transit speed and training tempo, radar, dense seas that punished any 10-20-minute surfaced window, and a strategic tempo that, by August, put preservation of life and compliance above operational daring. Quantitatively, the margin for an August attack was close even without surrender. Moon phase charts around 15-20 August offered limited dark-hour windows at the intended latitude. Monsoon season squalls in the western Pacific and tropical instability, nearer the target zone, promised sea states that could push pitch divided by roll beyond the safe unfolding envelope. 3-4 degrees of deck motion can upset wing lock engagement and fueling safety, as inland sea drills had implied. Every degraded variable added seconds. 30-60 seconds for a bulky hinge, 60-120 seconds for a catapult seal leak, and additive pauses for dolly alignment in cross-chop. With 3 aircraft, those seconds compounded into minutes, the difference between dawn's first light and the desired black sky approach. Post-ceasefire, those same minutes were reallocated to inspection. At Sasebo in late August, American teams measured, photographed, and diagrammed the boats. By September, formal reporting streams to the Naval Technical Mission to Japan, filled with sketches of the hangar cross-section, the catapult cylinder, and the aircraft handling path. Richard H. O'Kane's post-war dictum, "A submarine's best weapon is invisibility," paraphrase, anchored U.S. skepticism about the mission concept, but even skeptics conceded the boat's extraordinary reach and engineering coherence. The fusion of a long-range submarine hull with a 3-plane strike package compressed into 122 meters of steel remained novel. The moment held one final asymmetry. The I-400 concept's value to its creators resided in use. Its value to its captors resided in study. American boards tallied metrics, photographed fixtures, and organized tow and transfer plans. Japanese crews, who had practiced 12 15-minute launches for a year, now staged 12 15-minute sequences of a different kind, unshipping sensitive items, signing surrender logs, and standing down watches. The war's end redefined what counted as precision. Surrender froze the I-400 concept on the cusp of execution. The same quantified tolerances, fuel, sea state, deck time, that had constrained feasibility now governed an orderly capitulation, leaving a platform notable for engineering scope, but untested in combat effect. September-December 1945, Sasebo and Yokosuka, the U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan, USNTMJ, converted the I-400 program from an operational mystery into a cataloged set of measurements, procedures, and limits. Inspectors paced off the pressure-tight hangar's dimensions is approximately equal to 3.54. 0 meters diameter, length sufficient for 3-folded Aichi M6A1 Seirans in tandem. Traced the tilde, 26 meters catapult cylinder forward of the conning tower, and diagrammed dollies and rail guides that aligned each aircraft to the launcher. Displacement figures to 6,560 tons submerged and overall length to 122 meters were checked against Japanese logs. Fuel tank volumes and piping runs were sketched to understand the claimed tilde 37,500 nmi endurance at to 14 knots. The immediate finding was clear. The boats were internally coherent, purpose, built for a 3-aircraft launch in a 12-15-minute deck cycle under best conditions. USNTMJ interview summaries emphasized the choreography rather than any single gadget. Launch time broke into quantifiable segments. Hangar rollout to 60-90 seconds per aircraft. Unfolding and locking is approximately equal to 60-90 seconds. Fueling and arming is approximately equal to 120-180 seconds. And catapult hook-on and launch is approximately equal to 60 seconds. In aggregate, the critical path from hangar door open to third aircraft off the rail clustered around 14 minutes in sea state is less than or equal to 1-2 numbers, consistent with Inland Sea Training Notes, USNTMJ 1945. Paraphrase. Inspectors also logged the failure points: hinge binding, pneumatic seal leakage, dolly misalignment, and fueling spillage risk on a moving deck. Each error added 3,120 seconds, and the arithmetic punished the third aircraft disproportionately. Doctrinal analysis ran beside the tape measures. Richard H. O'Kane's skepticism framed much of the U.S. Commentary: A submarine's best weapon is invisibility. Paraphrase, post-war interview. And any requirement to remain surfaced, heading steady to generate apparent wind, inverted that advantage. USNTMJ officers noted that Allied air search radars in 1945 routinely detected a surfaced submarine-sized target at tens of thousands of yards, uncertain, range varied by set and conditions, often long before lookouts could close the visual gap. Even near Japan's coasts, B-24 divided by PB-4Y and carrier-based patrol patterns meant that a 10-20-minute launch window plus the inevitable pre- and post-evolution settling time created a block of exposure difficult to hide. Sustained radio silence, necessary but not sufficient. One report phrased the pre-surrender feasibility problem, USNTMJ 1945. Paraphrase. The mission's engineers weighed deception measures with the same cool lens. Briefing remnants suggested plans to overpaint Hinomaru and possibly apply U.S.-style markings to Seirans for a few precious seconds of mis-ID at dawn. Historiography. Proposed versus executed markings vary by source. Technically, paint and stencil sets were cheap. Operationally, their value shrank once radar and IFF governed most initial detections. Without floats favored to gain is approximately equal to 30-35 knots of cruise speed and extend combat radius into the 600-650 nmi band, configuration dependent. Uncertain recovery options narrowed to ditching and ad hoc pickup. USNTMJ annotated the trade in bureaucratic prose. The absence of floats simplifies launch handling but forecloses routine recovery. Paraphrase 1945. That sentence captured the doctrine, a one-shot, one-way strike that gambled pilots, aircraft, and a submarine secrecy on 12-15 minutes of deck time. Fuel and training appeared again in the post-war notebooks. Inventory sheets listed spares shortages for the two 1,200 HP Aichi Atsuda engines, thin stocks of pneumatic seals, and maintenance deferrals during mid-1945 workups. The mission correlated these with training logs to show a narrowing cadre of fully qualified pilots and deck crews. Minoru Genda's phrase, "ingenuity outrunning capacity," paraphrase 1944-45, was quoted in the analyses not as judgment against the engineers, but as context for a force whose fuel allocations, by quarter, had collapsed. The I-400's theoretical radius and impressive topside apparatus existed inside a logistics curve that no longer supported repetition, the very thing complex deck evolutions demand. Comparison with U.S. practice sharpened conclusions. American fleet submarines optimized for submerged attack and rapid low-signature surface charging. They carried no aviation mission that forced a fixed heading for minutes, where U.S. Doctrine accepted risk-shore bombardment. Lifeguard duty it did so with short exposure windows and high payoff to carrier operations. Against that baseline, the I-400's concept offered a unique asymmetric reach, 3 800 kilograms bombs per hull onto a distant, high-value aim point but at a cost of exposure and irrecoverable aircrew. Employment came too late to be evaluated in combat. One USNTMJ synthesis declared 1945. But the doctrinal delta was legible without shots fired. Invisible killers versus visible launchers. Quantitatively, the mission's appendices distilled the program to a few lines. Displacement to 6,560 tons submerged. Surfaced speed is approximately equal to 18.7 kts. Claimed endurance tilde 27,500 natemeda at 14 kts. Hangar diameter 355 4.0. Catapult length 26 meters. Aircraft complement 3. Bomb load per aircraft 800 kilograms. Deck cycle target SHAR 15分钟. C state 小于等于1 R. Each metric behaved under test. Together, they required an environment fuel abundance, low patrol density, permissive seas that no longer existed by 1945. The engineering fit was elegant. The operational fit had expired. Finally, the analysts mapped opportunity cost in plain figures. A single long-range I-400 sortie might burn fuel equivalent to several patrols by Type B-class submarines, still capable of sinking merchant tonnage measured in the tens of thousands. Even had a Seiran pair damaged Gatun gates or an Ulithi oiler, repair timelines and redundancy in USN. Logistics could have mitigated disruption faster than Japanese planners hoped. Uncertain, exact repair durations. A canal is a system. Resilience must be assumed. An engineering brief had warned at Kure, paraphrase 1945. Post-war, that caution read as prediction rather than pessimism. By December, the mission's fieldwork had shifted from inspection to disposition planning. The boats were sound enough to steam under escort. Their secrets now lay mostly in the synthesis of numbers and procedures already recorded. What remained for the record was a doctrinal footnote with enduring relevance. Multi-domain ideas can be right in principle yet wrong in timing. The I-400 seconds proved that reach and novelty cannot replace logistics and repetition. The deck cycle that dazzled in a placid inland sea could not be assumed in the ocean it meant to cross. Post-war inspection validated the I-400's engineering and quantified its launch math. But doctrine and logistics fuel, repetition, exposure rendered the concept obsolete on arrival. The platform's strengths could not be divorced from the brittle conditions it required. 1946, Hawaiian waters. With inspection complete and reporting lines closed, the U.S. Navy towed selected Japanese submarines, including the I-400 class, to see off Oahu and sank them rather than allow transfer or protracted storage. The decision was administrative and geopolitical at once. Preserve sensitive technologies in documents and drawings, deny intact examples to other powers, and clear harbors of large foreign hulls. For a boat 122 meters long and displacing to 6,560 tons submerged, disposition meant a final set of precise coordinates, demolition charges or torpedoes, and a depth that promised permanent archival silence. The engineering object that had been designed to cross to 37,500 nautical miles at 14 knots, claimed, ended in a controlled descent measured in minutes. Disposition closed the operational record and opened the interpretive one. Post-war staff syntheses read the program, not as a curiosity, but as a quantified attempt to use a submarine's stealth to deliver an aerial punch, 3 Aichi M6A1 Seirans per hull, each able to carry an 800 kilograms bomb inside a 12-15-minute deck cycle under ideal sea states, is less than or equal to 1-2. That arithmetic had been demonstrated in the inland sea. It had not been proven in the open ocean. Employment came too late to be evaluated in combat. A U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan, USNTMJ, report concluded, 1945. The scuttling made that judgment permanent, freezing the balance sheet where it had sat in August 1945. Engineering coherence on one side, fuel scarcity, training fragility, and exposure windows on the other. The counterfactual, what if the Seirans had launched, remains a calculation, not a narrative. Against the Panama Canal's Gatun locks, 3 aircraft from each, I-400 or I-401, would have aimed at lock gates or transformer yards feeding the machinery. Quantitatively, an 800 kilograms GP bomb could disable or deform a gate leaf. Qualitatively, U.S. Army engineers built redundancy and repair capacity into canal operations. An interdiction measured in days or weeks was plausible. A multi-month closure, less so, uncertain. Repair durations under combat conditions. Against Ulithi, a dawn surprise might have damaged a high-value hull, yet dispersal within a lagoon tilde, 19-22 miles across, and the quick reaction of pickets would have complicated second and third weapon deliveries. In both cases, success would have been path-dependent on the very variables that had constrained the I-400 program since 1944. Sea state at launch, minutes of darkness remaining, and whether Allied radars and patrol arcs noticed a surfaced submarine heading steady for wind. Doctrine absorbs such hypotheticals by translating them into design lessons. Richard H. O'Kane's post-war touchstone, "A submarine's best weapon is invisibility," paraphrase, became more than a line. It became a sorting rule. Concepts that forced long-surfaced intervals and steady headings had to purchase those exposures with decisive, repeatable effect. The I-400 seconds promised decisive effect, but could not guarantee repetition. Each launch consumed trained air crews that could not be recovered if floats were left behind, burned fuel that could not be replaced in late 1945, and risked the submarine's core asset stealth for at least 10-20 minutes. USNTMJ phrased the same constraint in a drier key. Sustained radio silence and weather exploitation would have been necessary but not sufficient. Paraphrase, 1945. The program's opportunity cost reads even more starkly when viewed from 1946 backward. For the bunker oil needed to run one I-400 sortie at to 14 knots, over 3,509,000 nautical miles, the IJN could dispatch several Type B-class patrols, whose results merchant tonnage sunk were additive and proven. Training hours invested to hit a 15-minute deck cycle could have deepened torpedo and evasion skills in the fleetboat force. Minoru Genda's phrase, "ingenuity outrunning capacity," paraphrase, 1944-45, thus registers not as disdain for innovation but as a resource diagnosis. Novelty arrived, just as the system lost the surplus that novelty requires. Yet the I-400 class left a technical legacy. The pressure-tight hangar, aircraft dollies, and catapult integration demonstrated that a submarine could be built around an aviation mission without collapsing structural integrity. The boat's internal arrangement, fuel tankage, dual diesels, and long-range navigation fits codified what a truly oceanic submarine could look like when endurance, not sprint speed, dominated design. Later navies explored different expressions of multi-domain reach, from cruise missile submarines to swimmer delivery vehicles. The through line is the same: covert platforms projecting effects far beyond torpedo range. The I-400 seconds were an early, extreme answer to that question. Strategically, the episode underlines the importance of timing. In 1942-43 before radar density and HF divided by DF saturation, an aircraft-carrying submarine might have found larger gaps between patrol arcs. In 1944-45, those gaps narrowed as Allied coverage thickened. In a fuel-rich Navy, a complex deck evolution can be rehearsed to the point of resilience. In a fuel-poor one, each rehearsal trades tomorrow's sortie for today's proficiency. And in a war where repair battalions, spare gates, and mobile power gear proliferate, single-shot infrastructure attacks must assume faster restoration than pre-war planners predicted. A canal is a system. Resilience must be assumed. An engineering brief had warned at Kure, paraphrase, 1945. The I-400 concept bet against that resilience. 1945's logistics and surveillance made the odds long before the first coin hit the felt. The wrecks, resting in deep water off Hawaii, complete the arc from metal to meaning. Drawings and measurement tables now carry the design farther than the hulls ever sailed in anger. For documentary purposes, the numbers that matter have not changed. To 6,560 tons submerged, to 122 meters overall, to 26 meters of catapult, 3 aircraft, 12-15 minutes. Those figures still impress. They also still imply the same exposure window that, absent fuel, time, and luck, Japan never found a way to pay down. The I-400 seconds proved that a submarine could project air power across oceans. They also proved that without fuel, training depth, and forgiving seas, a 12-15-minute deck cycle is a liability more than a weapon. Strategic intent outpaced logistics and timing. Novelty arrived as operational reach collapsed.